It's the remix, yeah, of the remix, yeah.
Welcome to episode 1 of the Bluegrass Ambassadors podcast. My name is Ben Wright, and I'm the banjo player in the Chicago-based bluegrass band Henhouse Prowlers. We've been fortunate as a band to travel the globe playing music in 35 countries and counting. From learning songs and traditions of different cultures to finding fans of American music in the most remote parts of the world, these adventures have shaped our journey and our lives. We've decided to share these experiences through our nonprofit Bluegrass Ambassadors and now with this podcast. Please come along with us as we post interviews, music, and stories from people you might never have heard from otherwise.
I'll pick you up. You gon' never ever run down, baby. Run down, baby. And when I'm done, tell me if you want some more, baby. Some more. I got plenty dollars in my name, plenty naira in my name, plenty dollars in my name, in my name, in my name, plenty dollars in my name. Hey, hey!
Thanks for tuning in to episode 1 of the Bluegrass Ambassadors podcast. Before we get started, I wanted to give a brief explanation as to what we're trying to do with our nonprofit and this podcast. About 5 years ago, our band, the Henhouse Prowlers, started getting these amazing opportunities to be musical ambassadors for the U.S. State Department. Our first trip was to 4 countries in West Africa, and it quite frankly blew our minds. The concept of diplomacy through music made immediate sense to us on so many levels as we had these incredible experiences playing with musicians in wild places ranging from the Sahara Desert to Siberia and many points in between. These trips not only gave us the opportunity to learn about the music and customs of these countries, but also to simply to get to know people face to face in a way most folks might not be able to do so easily. It began to dawn on us that there's something special here. The band has always been involved in education, but it became clear that this presented a unique opportunity to build a program for students of all ages that uses American folk music as a foundation to talk about music and cultures across the planet. About a month ago, we were able to work with a small mining district in remote Wyoming with this program. It was a powerful experience for both the students and the band. If you want to read more about it, there's a post on bluegrassambassadors.org alongside the other things we've been working on. We're always looking for help and other people to get involved, so feel free to reach out to us. Now, on to the podcast. Ultimately, we want to start interviewing people that we've met on our travels, both internationally and in our own hemisphere. I immediately knew I had to have this guy as our first guest. He's incredibly smart, well-spoken, and a student/lover of all musics, from Hindustani ragas to Grateful Dead jams. On top of that, we met him in a truly hilarious circumstance on one of our trips, which I won't spoil. Keep in mind that he's in one of the very few countries that block Skype, so I had to do this interview over the phone. It's not terrible by any means, but if it gets a little hazy, blame an overzealous government. Most of the music you'll hear is straight from recordings and YouTube videos of him performing. So without further ado, here's our good friend, Vijit Malik.
Well, it's peach picking time in Georgia. Now the picking time in Tennessee. Cotton picking time in Mississippi. Everybody picks on me. Now it's roundup time in Texas. And cowboys make whoopee.
Okay, folks, I have on the line here with me my good friend Vijit Malik. So, Vijit, tell me where you are and where you're from.
Excellent. So, Ben, I'm speaking to you from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. I'm not from here. I'm actually from India, but have been living here for about 20 years now.
Okay. I want to give kind of a brief story about how you and the Henhouse Prowlers met. We were on a State Department tour in the Middle East, and we spent a week in Dubai. We were playing a show at this kind of surreal venue called the Global Village, which is this kind of huge outdoor mall where every country in the world pretty much has their own storefront, I guess, or display where you can buy food and all sorts of trinkets from various countries. We were performing on this massive stage in front of a crowd of Emiratis, and we had been on the road for quite a while, and you know those gigs are kind of strange because you realize that people are seeing your music for the first time, and they're fascinated, but they're it's just kind of a strange experience for them and us. And in the middle of the show, we finished a song, and I heard somebody in the audience yell "Uncle Pen," and then it happened again in a few songs where somebody, I believe, yelled the "Hobo Song" and "Old and in the Way," and I was like, "What's going on here?" And I finally zeroed in on the voice, and there was this man standing there with this huge grin on his face and a big red turban on his head, and he was yelling all these bluegrass tunes out for us to play. And I just couldn't believe it. And I had to find you. And after our set, I ran around this huge backstage area and out to the front to connect with you. And that's kind of how we met.
Absolutely, Ben. That's how it happened. And I was driving home from work that day, and I got a call from a friend of mine who's actually also into music. He's a musician, and he's an event organizer. And he said, "Listen, you might want to stop by the Global Village this evening because there's a bluegrass band playing there." So I said, "Say what? Well, what did you say?" So he said, "No, there's a bluegrass band." And I said, "You've got to be kidding me, man! What would a bluegrass band be, doing playing at the Global Village?" And I said, "Are you sure you've got it right?" And he said, "No, I'm absolutely sure because he said he was called by representatives from the U.S. Embassy who said, 'Look, we know you've got some acts on the main stage this evening, but we'd like you to make room for these guys. We want them to play.'" And so I said, "Well, if there's a bluegrass band playing, I'd head over there right away." And that's what happened. So I came across, and like you said, you guys were really cooking, and there was me and maybe 5 or 6 Emiratis standing around, maybe a Saudi or 2, and they were sort of clapping politely, but I could see that they really didn't understand the music, and so I said, "Well, let me yell out a few bluegrass standards and see if that catches your attention," which I guess it did.
It sure did, and that's kind of how we struck up a friendship. You came to another show of ours, and then you and I have stayed in touch, and you've shared. We're friends on Facebook, and I keep seeing videos of your band in Dubai. Why don't you tell me about your band?
Yeah, so we started with, like I said, I've been living here for about 20 years or so. And, roughly about 10 years ago, I hooked up with another friend of mine who I had known from India and had jammed with in India. And this guy also, many years ago ended up coming to Dubai and working here. And so we would jam on and off, and then we decided, we said, look, let's take it a little further. And around that time, in the UAE, there was sort of the municipality, the authorities were becoming a little more liberal, amateur musicians playing at commercial venues. And so they opened up this scene where the establishment of the venue would have to get permission from the municipality for that night. And so this kicked off, a fairly robust amateur music scene. And we put a band together, a few like-minded guys, and we started out doing just stuff that, that I knew, American music mainly, stuff like Crosby, Stills and Nash, some Grateful Dead, some Neil Young, stuff like that. And initially these guys were like, listen, do you think this will have an appeal here? And do you think people would actually know this music? And I said, well, I'm not sure that they would know it, but I think if we have fun doing it, I'm sure, I'm sure there'd be an audience out there somewhere. And so that's how we got started. And sure enough, I think, the more we enjoyed doing what we did, the more people would come and hear us and say, look, you guys are different. You're not run of the mill, but, we like the music and we like what we hear.
Yeah. The name of your band is the Desert Ramblers, right?
So that was the earlier band. I had a band which was the Desert Ramblers. You're absolutely right. The Ramblers don't play out as much anymore because the guy that the lead guitarist at some point in time had developed a problem with his ear. I think he developed a case of tinnitus, so he stopped playing out. And then I put another band together, which is the current band I play with, which is called Roots.
Okay. Just so folks that are listening know, I'm going to include links to all of Vijit's music and places you can go see him play. There are some really fantastic YouTube videos. I'm actually going to play some of it right here. Then we'll have access to plenty of his stuff in the notes of the podcast here.
See boys, they shall float, 'cause I've got the big river blues. I'm going down to Muscle Shoals, time to get better, there I'm told, 'cause I've got the big.
So, Vijit, tell me what it's like to play music in Dubai. You mentioned that, you know, you've been there for 20 years and they've kind of loosened up on the rules there. We were in Saudi Arabia on the same trip, and live music performance was illegal. We could only perform at the embassy on that trip. I didn't know that UAE had gone through similar things.
Well, Ben, Dubai has always been a very cosmopolitan city, and in the Middle East, it's a place that you can come and live pretty much the way you would want to, and nobody really, nobody hassles you. We have people from all over the world living here. So it's always been, very cosmopolitan and pretty liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this was sort of a natural, extension and a way for them to go to, to sort of encourage people to come, encourage tourism, encourage, talent to sort of find an expression. So, when we started playing, I think, pretty much as you described, to see a guy in a turban yelling out, pig in a pen and that kind of stuff, which blew your mind, I guess. If I'm playing a song like Deep River Block Watson, people would wonder, what's that guy in a turban doing playing Doc Watson? But it's all, I suppose, to put it in context. I studied in the States, and this was in Ohio actually, so out in the Midwest, and all of my friends played guitar and listened to this kind of music. So that's where I sort of in college was exposed to. I was already listening to Western music, so stuff like Simon & Garfunkel. But then I was, I was exposed to stuff like Peter, Paul and Mary, The Grateful Dead, Crosby, Stills and Nash, all of that good stuff. The band, so that was where I developed, a real keen interest in this kind of music.
And so you actually heard a lot of that music, the Dead, the band. You heard that before you ever came to the United States.
I was listening to a lot of Western music before coming to the States. So, stuff like I said, Simon Garfunkel, the Beatles, bands like the Dead, the Band, Little Feat, these sorts of bands at that time, and I'm going back, the 70s and 80s. There wasn't any internet at that time. These bands didn't really travel across the globe or their music didn't travel as much as it does now. There was limited exposure to these bands. They were, mainly sort of more, American bands, if you will. It's only when I got to college in the mid-80s that I started listening to them.
Were you a musician in India before you came to the United States?
I was, Ben, and in school in India, I actually studied Indian or Hindustani classical music.
Wow.
And I play an Indian instrument called the sarod.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my main instrument through school. I still play it, though, much more infrequently than I'd like to.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so I started with, I learned Hindustani classical music, and then sort of expanded my taste beyond that.
Yeah.
But I find that the music that I listen to, even stuff like the Dead, and these are very sort of improvisational bands.
Yeah.
And in that sense, there is sort of some similarity to Indian music.
Tell me some famous Hindustani musicians that I might be able to link to and people can listen to.
Sure. So the most famous one, I guess, would be Ravi Shankar.
Sure.
Who sort of took Indian or Hindustani classical music out to the West. And one of his his compatriots was a sarod player called Ali Akbar Khan.
Uh-huh.
And Ali Akbar Khan established a school of music in California.
Huh.
And so these guys would be, I suppose, amongst the most famous of Indian musicians who've gone out. And then there's obviously, there's Zakir Hussain on the tabla, and Zakir is just he's a universal phenomenon. And Zakir has played with all of these people, and Zakir's father was part of this generation of musicians.
Part of that tradition of that music is improvisation.
It is, Ben. So in that form of music, you don't have any written music. It's passed on orally, and it's literally the teacher, if you will, imparts all of his knowledge to his students, and it's literally just by playing and by learning. There's nothing is written, but it's an interesting form of music because you have you would have heard of ragas. Ragas are sort of the foundations, if you will, and each rag has a defined scale. And a combination of, it could be minor or major notes along the scale, ascending and descending. And so that, if you will, would be the foundation of the music that you would set out to play. So within the foundation, you can improvise. But it's not just that, you would be playing anything. You have to stick to the basic tenets of the rag. Complex beat patterns that you would use as accompaniment. So you have from 7-beat, 6-beat patterns, 7-beat patterns, 12-beat patterns, 14-beat, 16-beat, so on and so forth. So it's a fairly complex form of music. It's different from Western music in that you would not, within a rag, you wouldn't play different chords, if you know what I mean. So
yeah.
It's all within the scale itself. But then yes, different note combinations, on the ascending and descending scale.
That kind of tradition of improvisation within the music where you come from, do you think that allowed you to find a connection in bands like the Grateful Dead? Was that something that appealed to you because you were used to improvisation in the music you heard at home?
I think it did, Ben, to a certain extent, because again with the Dead, there was so many. They really weren't a recording band; they were more of a live band, and people thrived on the bootleg recordings that one could get your hands on. And so if you were listening to let's say a song by the Dead, every time they played it, they played it differently.
Right.
So and I suppose because they had such an adoring audience that they were given that latitude to actually improvise.
Right.
Every time they didn't have to do it the same way every time.
Yeah.
And some by their own admission, some nights it worked, other nights it just didn't. So some nights were really bad.
Yeah.
But then you had that latitude, like I said, So on the nights that it actually came together, it was magical.
Yeah, that's a hard thing. I mean, I certainly improvise a little bit in bluegrass, but it really is nowhere close to the improvisation that comes from the jam band scene in the States. And part of me struggles with the thought of having one of those bad nights. You know, it's like you want to put on a good show every night, and when you're improvising, that's more elusive. So
Sure.
yeah. So when you play music in Dubai, what's the audience response like?
So far, we've had a pretty good response, Ben. I would think. Again, it's like I said, it's not that people would necessarily know all of the music, but I guess what we would do is we'd sort of mix it up a little bit with some of the more eclectic stuff in the set, and then we'd play some standards that we know people would recognize. So particularly stuff by the Beatles, if you were playing Hey Jude, or you'd throw those in there, so they'll keep people's interest. But at the same time, we've had it said to us that some of the stuff you do, we've never heard these songs before, but we really like them to the point where they've actually gone back and said, we're going to start listening to this stuff.
That's cool.
So a song, for example, that we've done, which very few people here knew, was Ventura Highway by America. They just liked that tune. They liked the riff. They liked the harmonies, and so I guess to a certain extent, it's gone out and sort of told people, hey, there's this music out there that is pretty cool. If you listen to it.
Yeah, I just before we got on this phone call, I watched a video of you doing that, and it sounds great. It's awesome.
Oh okay.
I
wish we had better quality videos out there. These are all shot on somebody's handphone. So
yeah, but
apologies.
I feel the same way about every video I see of my band. I thought the sound quality was fine, and one of the things that I really liked about that video was there was a good-sized audience, and you could tell they were into it. Like people were moving around, and I saw some fists up in the air. Like it was, it looked like a fun show.
So that's the one that you watched, I guess, is from a night of the Huddle, and we've ended up playing there quite a bit. And what tends to a lot of our friends then come in for that night. But apart from that, we've also on occasion had people come up to us and say, hey, we heard you guys, and there's people that we don't know from before would come up and say, we've been coming back to this venue, just waiting to see you guys play again, and you haven't been around. How does one get in touch, and how does one figure out your schedules? So obviously, I think I'm hoping that we are able to make that connection with with people that don't know us as well, and who aren't inherently biased towards our music.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the beautiful things about being a performer and someone in the audience is you feel this connection, and it's a powerful thing. Like this is the first time we're doing this podcast, and I couldn't think of a better person to do it with because of the connection that we made across multiple cultures with just a kind of music. It was a powerful thing, and I got to tell you, like we had been on the road for weeks, and to have somebody shout enthusiastically and call out songs that we knew just kind of like made my day, if not my month. And and it goes both ways, I mean, you're talking about having the audience say how much they love hearing the music. Sometimes it goes the other way, or a lot of times it does. When you feel an audience into your music, it just is one of the greatest gifts in the world.
Sure.
So.
Well, I tell you, for me, that seeing you guys up there, at the Global Village on that stage was surreal, and really, I mean, as much I guess as it blew your mind, it blew my mind, because nothing like that. I'd never seen anything like that at the Global Village or anywhere else in Dubai, before that. So I was really, really psyched.
So when you were in the United States, were you able to see some bluegrass? That was in the 70s?
So I was there in the 80s. And so like I said, I went to college, in Ohio. Mm-hmm. But I had many friends who were musicians and who continue to be musicians, to this day. And one friend in particular is from Buffalo, and he's a multi-instrumentalist and has played in various ensembles, including bluegrass bands. So I would, my roommate and I, we'd go up and visit. His name is Dave Ruck. Mm-hmm. And we'd go visit Dave in Buffalo, and he'd take us out to see some of these live bands play. And so that's where I got to see a lot of bluegrass and hear a lot of bluegrass music. And then the first time I actually went to see a live bluegrass band, it was great because you can hear the music and you recognize how tight it is in terms of the harmonies and everything else that's going on. But to actually see it visually is, again, a different experience. And I guess I was hooked.
Well, I hear that, and I feel that myself. But I remember one of the things you also told me was that I think you said one of the greatest regrets in your life was that you never toured with the Grateful Dead. Didn't you tell me that?
So I consider myself fortunate that I got to see the band a couple of times before I left the States. And I was there was a time when I was graduating when I said, look, why not just take a gap here and go follow these guys, and sort of get my fill of it. And so yes, I guess in a sense I would have enjoyed doing that. Because by the time Dave, from Buffalo, also in a Grateful Dead cover band, and so we'd gone up to see his many times before I went to my first Dead show. And by the time I got to my first Dead show, I was already a recognizable figure in the Deadhead scene. So it just felt really comfortable, and just, people were just so nice, and the whole parking lot scene was just wonderful.
I got to imagine, just like with me, your turban certainly makes you stand out amongst a sea of white people.
You would think?
Well, I do. I can imagine that scenario. Hey, do you happen to remember? You said you saw a couple of Dead shows. Do you remember what year they were and where they were? I got to imagine some people listening to this are big Deadheads and
Absolutely.
would want to know.
Absolutely. This was 1989, mm-hmm. and I saw them in Louisville, Kentucky, mm-hmm. and in Pittsburgh.
Okay. 1989. I enjoy the Grateful Dead. I'm not a super nerd about it. John, my mm-hmm. bass player and business partner, is, and I could imagine mm-hmm. he would at least be able to say, "Oh, I bet that was when they were playing these songs." And so I look forward to hearing his reaction to that.
So do I, actually.
I'll make sure to pass it along with him and share his thoughts back with you. Can we quickly take a step back to India? I'm curious.
Sure.
Now, what languages do you speak? Obviously, you speak English. What else?
So I speak English, Hindi, and a bit of Punjabi, which is my mother tongue.
Okay. And do you speak any Arabic because you're in Dubai?
I don't. I can't speak Arabic fluently. Uh-huh. But I can understand parts of it, and I can say a few sentences in Arabic. But unfortunately, because I don't speak it regularly. I did actually take a course in Arabic, but I didn't stay with it. I didn't speak it, enough.
Sure. So when you were in India, where did you
mm-hmm.
live?
I grew up in Calcutta, India, in the east, which had a very vibrant music scene. Lots of Hindustani classical music, but also lots of Western music, and very sort of appreciative crowd for all sorts of musical influences. And then I went to school. I went to a boarding school in the north, and that's where two things happened for me, I guess. One was that I learned Hindustani classical mm-hmm. and how to play the sarod. But also, I was also part of a choir that sang Christmas carols. in four-part harmony, if you will.
Sure.
So I guess, and that's where I guess, if I think back on it, that's where I developed this sort of liking for harmonies, vocal harmonies. And so, a lot of the stuff that I listen to is very very much in that vein. So, Simon Garfunkel, I guess, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and all of that stuff.
You sent me some recordings, and one of them is a Paul Simon tune, Slip Sliding Away. And
Yep.
I think your history with Simon and Garfunkel still shows through today.
Oh, no doubt. I think Paul Simon is one of the greatest songwriters ever. And again, a sort of very adept guitarist as well. So big fan.
So you were growing up in Calcutta? Were you performing music there?
No, I was not actually. But I was exposed to music in Calcutta because my mother actually is very keen on music. She was at the time, still is, and she was part of a music society, appreciation society, that would actually get a lot of these artists to come in and play at their gatherings and things like that. So that, and so I would sort of tag along and listen to the music. And then when I finished school, I went back to Calcutta, between school and college. And then I was fortunate at that time, again through my mom. She introduced me to this family of great Indian musicians. The father, if you will, is a guy called Imran Khan, who was again very established on the sitar. He has 4 sons, all of whom are brilliant musicians. So I got to hang out at their house, for a while and just absorb, the scene, if you will. And it was very much, music, happening at whenever. If you walked into their house, it's like an open house, and, you'd get people coming in, pupils, disciples who would sit and just, hear them play and learn from them. So that was a great scene.
That's cool. And you think that scene is still going on there?
Not to the extent that I guess one would want it to continue, because that is in a sense, a tradition. But people just, I think in this fast-paced world, people just don't have the time anymore. So to learn in that sort of traditional form. Yeah. So now, it's more about quick fixes and things like that.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that's not happening enough.
I think there are little pockets everywhere you go, but it's. I would agree with you that we could all use some more community-based music creation where we're from. I'm so happy that you're starting your own scene in Dubai. I can't tell you, every time you post a video from one of your shows, I watch it, because I think you're doing something really important in a place that hasn't always put a focus on music. If it was like Saudi Arabia 20 years ago, where public music performance was not legal at all, and the fact that you're performing in a place like that on a regular basis is, I think, a pretty monumental thing, and I respect you for that, for sure.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. And I can tell you, for me, it's very therapeutic. I mean, I don't do this for a living. I have a day job. I'm a banker, actually, by profession. So I find that, when on the weekends and when one does get to play out, it is very, very therapeutic, and it's, we just tremendously enjoy what we do. Speaking of the sort of spending of more sort of community type of music and settings, one of my bucket list things is to actually go to another musician that I tremendously respect is Jorma Kaukonen.
Yeah.
And Jorma's got this ranch out in, I guess, in the middle of Ohio or Cincinnati, close to Cincinnati. And I've sort of followed some of the stuff that happens there. And I would just love to go and hang out for a week and, just hear these fabulous musicians come in and do their thing.
My exposure to Jorma Kaukonen was, I think, our second album. We had a producer from Colorado, a woman named Sally Van Meter, who's a fabulous dobro player. She played with Jerry Garcia. She's played with all sorts of people. But she said that one of her most powerful musical experiences was she toured with Jorma Kaukonen as his dobro player for a tour, and just said that being around him was kind of a magical experience and really pushed her to be a better musician and in a lot of different ways.
He certainly is, and one of the things I like about him is that he does what he does and he sticks to what he does. And I mean this whole thing of his style of finger picking, and sort of he refers to it as the Reverend Gary Davis style. Mm-hmm. And he will religiously stick to that, where it's very intricate music, but it's not always the most flashy, if you know what I mean.
Sure,
you're not shredding up and down the neck, with that style. But he will religiously stick to it because that's what he does, and that's why I respect him for that.
That leads me to ask you, who are your biggest influences on the guitar?
It would have to be I listen to a lot of the Dead, and I like Jerry's style. I like the fluidity with which he plays. Again, he's not not necessarily the most adept or the quickest or the slickest. But the stuff that he plays, I just find it harmonically so apt to the song. Sure. And so Jerry certainly. Jorma Kaukonen, again, I've mentioned him. I listen to a lot of Dylan. I love hearing what he does. And again, when people tell me that, Dylan's a great musician, but I just wish somebody else would sing his songs. To me, that is so wrong. I think Dylan has a very powerful voice. It's changed over the years, but then, it's so apt to what he does. Yeah. And the songs that he sings. Yeah. If he was singing Celine Dion stuff, yes, certainly. That's not what he does.
Do you write any of your own songs?
I haven't really gotten around to it. I've written one, but one or two at best. But I haven't really gotten down to writing actively. And again, I must admit, it's frightening to think of it. Actually sit down and it's easy to play covers. It's easy to play other people's songs, but actually sit down and write something. Yeah. It's daunting.
To this day, I struggle with it because for me the hardest thing is turning around and listening back to it and being suspicious that it's terrible all the time.
But you asked me, who I listen to and who are some of my biggest influences, and I'd have to say the Hen House Prowlers are right up there now.
Oh, Vijit. Well, that's very, very kind of you. Folks, I want to assure you I have not paid Vijit a penny for this interview.
I mean it. I absolutely mean it, Ben.
Oh, thank you, man.
Fantastic stuff, really.
That means a lot. I want to ask you a question that I plan on asking everybody that I interview on our Bluegrass Ambassadors podcast here. And it's a big kind of broad question, especially from people from different parts of the world. What exactly does music mean to you as a musician, but also just as a human being? What does music do for you, and how does it enrich your life?
So I think, Ben, for me, certainly, like I said, music is therapy. In many ways, I think it's so important to have something outside of what you do day to day, to be able to take your mind off all of that and be able to go into a different world. So that's what music is for me. And what I found is that, it's really communication at the end of the day. I do travel, I've traveled over the years. I've traveled back to the States, and every time I come to the States, I try and hook up with these two friends of mine who are both musicians. One is Dave out of Buffalo, and then there's Chris, who lives in Boston, is also a musician. And whenever we get together, we sort of end up doing what we did in college. And when you sit down and you start to jam and you sing those songs, it's like no time has passed. It's just everything fits. It goes, and you go back 20, 25 years with effortlessly. So I think it is communication. I think people played together, people made music together more. I think the world would be a better place. It sounds a bit contrite, but I honestly think it would work.
I 100% agree with you. I've seen that firsthand so many times, and it's the reason that you and I are talking right now is because we shared something musical Absolutely. In common. Boy, Vijit, I hope that the next time you come to the States, we figure out a way to connect, and it would be my honor to have you on stage with us at some point. But even if that doesn't happen, we need to get together and play some music, even behind closed doors. I think it would be a huge honor for me to do that.
Ben, that would be super. I would absolutely love that, and certainly the next time I'm there, I will give you a buzz before coming across, and if we can hook up, I would be really psyched about that.
That's great. Well, folks, as I said earlier, you can look in the notes for this podcast for links to all of the music that Vijit sent me, and we're going to stay connected, so I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't the last time that you hear from him. Vijit, thanks so much for doing this. It really means a lot to us and our fans listening to this podcast that you were able to do this interview.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you. It was my pleasure and my privilege.
All right, that was my first interview in the bag. Thanks for having a listen with us here on the Bluegrass Ambassadors podcast. Make sure you check out his music in the notes for this podcast. In particular, the song that's playing behind me talking right now is actually over this beautiful video that he took in Sri Lanka with a bunch of elephants. And I just love that he used this song to talk about a river in a totally different part of the world. And check links to all of his stuff. You're going to be kind of blown away by the breadth of his knowledge, and I hope you could tell how warm and interesting he was from this interview. So thanks. Make sure you check out our website, bluegrassambassadors.org. We're going to try to do this monthly, and if it goes well, maybe even a little bit more. So stay tuned for our next episode in a month, and I'm super excited who's going to be on that one too. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Little heart be true now, darling, and you love too. We're riding on that new river train, riding on that new river train, that same old train that brought me here is gonna carry me away again. Well, darling, you can love three. Darling, you can love three. You can love three and be true to me. Oh, darling, you can love three. Riding on that new river train, riding on that new river train, that same old train that brought me here's gonna carry me away again. That same old train that brought